Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel Lit Decoded, your companion for English literature. Some stories begin in comfort, others begin in the middle of the ocean on a small overcrowded fishing boat carrying a family that has left everything behind. This is one of those stories. It's about war, escape, and survival. It's about how courage can be passed down through generations. And it's about one woman who turned the struggles of her past into a life of leadership, innovation, and inspiration. Today, we are exploring My Immigration Story by Tan Le, a journey from a war torn Vietnam to the global stage. Let's begin by meeting the woman herself. Let's begin by meeting the woman at the heart of the story, Tan Le. She is a Vietnamese born Australian entrepreneur, author, and public speaker. She fled Vietnam at the age of just 4, traveling with her mother, grandmother, and sister, and starting a new life in Australia from almost nothing. She grew up facing poverty, racism, and cultural isolation, yet she transformed those early struggles into a story of resilience, leadership, and innovation. In 1998, she was named Young Australian of the Year for her community work, a recognition that catapulted her onto the national stage. Later, she co founded Emotive, a company pioneering brainwave sensing technology, and became known worldwide for her TED Talk, My Immigration Story. But behind these achievements lies a powerful personal history, one shaped by war, by courage, and by the extraordinary bond between 3 generations of women. And to understand that history, we have to go back to the Vietnam War. Tan Le's story is remarkable, but to truly understand it, we need to look at what came before she was even born. Her childhood and her family's decisions were shaped by one of the most turbulent periods in modern history. It's a history of war, political change, and the mass movement of people in search of safety. So, before we follow her personal journey, let's take a step back to the Vietnam War, the conflict that set everything in motion. The Vietnam War lasted from 1955 to 1975, fought between Communist North Vietnam backed by Soviet Union and China and anti-communist South Vietnam supported by United States and its allies. It was part of the Cold War struggle between communism and capitalism. The war ended on April 30, 1975, with the fall of Saigon and the unification of Vietnam under communist rule. In the years that followed, strict government control, censorship, and economic hardship pushed hundreds of thousands to flee the country. Many escaped in small, overcrowded boats known as boat people, risking storms, pirates, and starvation in search of safety. Tan Le's family was part of this exodus in the early 1980s. In the years that followed, strict government control, censorship, and economic hardship pushed hundreds of thousands to flee the country. Many escaped in small, overcrowded boats known as boat people, risking storms, pirates, and starvation in search of safety. Tan Le's family was part of this exodus in the early 1980s. After the war, life in Vietnam changed dramatically. Like I said, the new government introduced land reforms, political re education camps, and strict censorship. Opposition was silenced, economic hardship was everywhere, there were shortages of food, jobs, and basic freedoms. For many in South, especially those linked to the former regime of foreign forces, there was a real fear of persecution. That fear drove a mass exodus of people from Vietnam. Hundreds of thousands, as I said before, fled between 1975 and the early 1980s. But leaving was incredibly dangerous. These boats faced violent storms, disease, and starvation. Pirates were a constant threat, especially in the Gulf of Thailand. Some families, terrified of what might have might happen if they were caught, even carried poison so they could die quickly rather than face capture. For those who survived, the next stop was often a refugee camp in countries like Malaysia, Thailand, or Indonesia. They would wait there sometimes for months, sometimes for years, before being resettled in places like the United States, Canada, or Australia. In the 1970s and 80s, 1970s and 1980s, Australia opened its doors to many Vietnamese refugees under its humanitarian program. Communities like Footscray in Melbourne become home to families starting from nothing, learning a new language, finding work, and building a future. This history isn't just background, it's the reason Tanley's story exists at all. In the early 1980s, when waves of refugees were still fleeing Vietnam, one of those small, overcrowded fishing boats carried a young woman of just 18 years old, already a mother of two, along with her own mother and her two little girls. One of those girls was Stanley. They left behind a home shadowed by war and fear and entered a world of danger at sea, pirates, storms, hunger, with no guarantee they would survive. And yet, that journey, as terrifying as it was, became the foundation of a story that would one day inspire people all over the world. So now, let's step into Tanley's life, beginning with the escape that shaped her earliest memories and defined the strength of three generations of women. Tanley's mother was only 18 years old when she made the decision to flee Vietnam. She was already in an arranged marriage and had two young daughters. The family's escape was carefully disguised. They left on what looked like a simple fishing trip. In reality, it was a desperate bid for freedom. Stanley opens her speech actually with a reflective question. How can one explain the deep bonds between three generations of women in just 10 minutes? So she is here mentioning the TED Talk. She has given 10 minutes of time to explain or to narrate the story of her life. Meanwhile, she is actually telling the audience that how can she explain the deep bonds that these three women, generations of three women carry. She actually set the tone by describing herself as a small girl who now became an adult, who once endured the 5 days and nights on a small boat in China Sea. The story is actually not linear, but rather she itself saying it is a jigsaw puzzle of powerful memories that have shaped her identity. So it's not linear. The first puzzle piece is her maternal father. So here she is mentioning about her maternal father. He was a poet and a playwright who actually stood for Vietnam's unity and freedom. But when the communists entered Saigon, he also lost his last hope, burning his life's work, and withdrew into silence until his death. So this shows the helplessness that her grandfather felt. Although Tanley actually never met her grandfather, his memory lived on through her grandmother. So the memory of her grandfather is actually living through the stories that has been narrated by her grandmother. She was taught to value endurance. So Tanley was taught by her grandmother and mother to value endurance and to ensure his life was not in vain a lesson in surviving history's harshness. Tanley's mother was only 18 years old when she made the decision to flee Vietnam. She was already in an arranged marriage and had two young daughters. The family's escape was carefully disguised. They left on what looked like a simple fishing trip. In reality, it was a desperate bid for freedom. Everyone on board knew the risk, pirates, storms, and the possibility of never reaching land. The danger was so real that adults carried poison, a last resort in case they were captured. Tanley's own memories of that journey come in fragments. small pieces that have stayed with her for a lifetime. She remembers the steady thrum of the boat's engine, the endless roll of the waves, and the vast horizon stretching in every direction. She doesn't recall the pirates, but she remembers the relief of sporting an oil rig off the Malaysian coast. She remembers the sadness of a young man dying during the journey. And she remembers something small but unforgettable, the taste of her very first apple given to her by the oil rig workers. That apple became a symbol of hope and kindness in a time of fear and uncertainty. After 5 days and nights at sea, the boat reached safely. But the journey was far from over. Tanley's family spent next 3 months in a refugee camp before being resettled in Australia. They arrived in a country where everything was new, the language, the culture, even the weather, and they carried with them the courage that had kept them alive on the open sea. After 3 long months in the refugee camp, Tanley's family was sent to Australia to a working class suburb of Melbourne called Footscray. This was a place where many immigrants had come to start over. People from different countries, speaking different languages, all trying to rebuild their lives from nothing. For Tanley's mother, starting over meant working anywhere she could, on farms, in factories, and taking night classes in English and information technology. She did all of this while raising her daughters in extreme poverty. Tanley remembers wearing second-hand school uniforms, pulling on two pair of socks to hide the holes, and pretending she didn't hear the racist slurs, words like slit eye, or see the graffiti that told her to go home. She remembers studying as hard as she could, even when the family did not have enough to eat. She remembers sharing a single bed with her mother and sister and lying awake at night to comfort her mother when the nightmares of the boat came back. It was a hard, unforgiving life. But it was also where the bond between the women in her family became unshakable. Today, they held on and together. They slowly began to build something better. As Stanley grew older, she found herself living in two different, very different worlds. In one world, she was the high achieving student, the girl who pushed herself to excel in her studies, determined to make something of the chance her family had fought so hard to give her. In other world, she was deeply connected to her community, spending her time helping people who were living with domestic violence, battling addiction, or struggling on the margins of society. Her mother's determination never stopped. Over the years, she managed to open a small computer store, then later a beauty salon. She also started support centers for immigrant women and children, building the same kind of safety net she had once needed herself. Then, while Tanley was still in law school, everything changed. She was named Young Australian of the Year. In an instant, she was catapulted from her quiet life in Footscray into elite spaces, places with rules she had never been taught. She did not know which fork to use or how to speak the polished language of official functions. She felt like an outsider. But her mother's advice rang in her ears. You are the same age I was when we boarded the boat. No was never an option. Just do it and don't be what you are not. And so she spoke not about herself but about youth, unemployment, about education, about people society preferred to ignore. She used her platform to give a voice to the voiceless. Tanley completed her law degree, but something in her heart told her this wasn't the path she was meant to follow. She wanted to create, to take risk, to build something new. She gathered a small team of dreamers. They had big ideas but no money. Most of those ideas failed, but some succeeded brilliantly. Eventually, she made a bold decision to move to the United States. Guided entirely by intuition, she relocated within 3 months. There, she began a new journey, stepping into the world of technology and innovation. And through it all, she held on to the one thing that had carried her from fishing boat to the global stage: the courage to question the rules, to see things differently, and to keep going when the odds were against her. Before she ends her story, Tanley speaks of her grandmother, a woman who defied every expectation of her time. As a second wife, she was abused by her mother in law and abandoned by her husband. But instead of accepting her fate, she took him to court and just won. In a culture shaped by Confucian traditions and patriarchal rules, this was unheard of. It was an act of defiance and a living example of her family's beliefs it can be done. Tanley tells of feeling her grandmother's presence when she died, a final goodbye, a passing of strength from one generation to the next. For her, the women in her family are its sinew, the force that holds everything together. Stanley ends her talk with a question as much for herself as for her audience. Can I give them a bow in their lives, dipping bravely into each wave, the unperturbed and steady beat of the engine, the vast horizon that guarantees nothing? She wonders if she would ever want her own children to experience what she went through. The answer is complicated. No one would choose trauma, and yet she knows that the board gave her something she could never replace: the courage to face a vast, uncertain world. If she could pass on that strength without suffering, she would. But the truth is, it was the journey itself that made her who she is. Her story, from a little girl on a crowded boat to an internationally recognized voice, is a reminder of what human resilience looks like. It's the story of survival, of women's strength, of finding identity in the space between where we come from and where we choose to go. Discussing the key themes of this particular talk, migration and identity is the first key theme. Feminine strength and generational legacy. Okay, then we have the third one, which is poverty, racism, and resilience. The fourth one is outsider perspective and empowerment, and the last one is self discovery and purpose beyond profession. Now, ultimately, what does this story teach us? The first point is, can privilege make us forget resilience? What stories do we carry from our ancestors? Can being an outsider be a gift? Resilience comes from struggle. Family gives us strength. Being an outsider is not a weakness. We can make change even from small beginnings. All these things can be seen in the talk of Tanley. The very important point to be noted is the opening lines. It has a powerful beginning. The opening, or actually, it begins with a rhetorical question, which also emphasizes emotional depth and generational bonds. The opening itself or maybe the talk itself introduces the speaker's personal journey, and also it builds a kind of suspense and invites empathy of the audience. Now, coming to the conclusion, it's actually a thoughtful reflection. It is ending with a metaphor of both. It also expresses conflicted feelings about privilege, and it also leaves the audience with a poetic question. And this particular talk reinforces themes of resilience and identity. Now we are going to discuss about the language style, which is personal, but it is also powerful. As we know, it is first person narration, which is having a deeply personal tone. It is also conversational, but it is poetic in places. It also uses, or Tanley uses, charged words, which is emotionally charged words. She also used simple language, which can reach directly to the heart of the audience. discussing the literary devices that she had used, we can see the use of metaphor. The example is jigsaw puzzle, which actually represent fragmented memory. Then we have symbolism, where we can see boat is represent a symbol for courage. Okay, her journey, etc. Then we also have apple. Apple is actually a symbol which represent kindness. And then we have imagery. For example, steady beat of the engine dipping into the waves. Okay, this is the example for imagery. Now, talking about repetition, she actually repeating the same phrase, I don't know, which actually emphasizes uncertainty. Then we have anecdote, that is grandmother's court case story is actually an example for anecdote. Then we have a contrast, okay, that talks about between poor foods gray and elite circles, which actually shows the contrast. The talk also has a foreshadowing. The boat never left me, which actually represent a lasting impact. Now, talking about the contemporary relevance, the talk highlights global issues such as war, migration, identity, and inequality. It also shows how marginalized voices can rise to lead and inspire. It also actually, the talk of Stanley actually encourages audience to develop a kind of empathy for refugees and immigrants. It also reminds us lots of other things. For example, stories shape society. It's a truth. The stories that we hear is actually what shape the society. Stanley's story reminds us that resilience isn't built in comfort. It is forged in struggle in the moments when we have no choice but to keep going. Her journey from a small fishing boat to the global stage is a proof that where we start does not define where we can go. If this video helped you understand the topic better, please like, share, and subscribe. I'll be bringing you more such videos to make English easier for degree and postgraduate students. So stay connected and keep learning. Thank you.